Will you pray with me? Let me hear what you will speak when I call to you in my heart. Let us hear what you will speak when we turn to you in our hearts. Our gospel passage today was long. There's a lot packed in, and there are many, many themes to pursue. So are you ready to hear my first sermon? About an hour long? I'm just kidding. Not an hour. I chose one important theme, and that is the transforming power of loving conversations with people with whom we disagree. Like Jesus meeting the woman at the well, we all have the power to hear one another into speech. Being heard and being seen truly is a way of experiencing God with us. It is living water, a quenching of our thirst for love and belonging. What is living water for you? What do we thirst for? There have been sermons on this passage depicting the woman at the well as a sinful woman for having had 5 husbands. That is reading into the text. At no time does Jesus accuse her of sinning. What Jesus does is witness to her experience. She recognizes that he sees her, he knows her life, he speaks of her experience. But we don't get the details of her story in this passage. We can guess. Some possibilities, given the culture that they were in, was that she might have been barren and abandoned or divorced 5 times, or maybe widowed and divorced repeatedly. We don't know. Another important piece of backstory to this passage is the history between the Samaritans and the Judeans. In 732, when Assyria conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, all the people of the southern kingdom, Judah, were removed from their land and taken captive in Assyria. But in the northern kingdom, Samaria, some people were able to stay. And then Assyria brought in non-Jews, Gentiles, and over generations, they intermarried. So what we have in this situation between Samaritans and Judeans are people with common roots, common history, very, very similar religious practices, but very little tolerance for each other. I grew up in East Tennessee, a PK, a pastor's kid. And this passage reminds me of a visitor who came to town and saw all those churches and said, wow, this town must really love each other. And the guide said, well, they may, oh, I'm sorry, blew the first joke. The visitor said, wow, these people must really love God. And the guide said, well, yes, they may love God, but they sure as heck don't love each other. A wise pastor that I know said, when two people argue religion, both are wrong. Jesus and the woman at the well have a conversation, but it's not an argument. The world is thirsty for the kind of love that reaches across social conventions and barriers, the kind of love that invites mutuality and respect. It's the kind of love that is willing to listen and take time to really hear. Sometimes, though, it is the people who are closest to us who become the most difficult to see, to hear, to accept, and to love. Right now, in our interim time, we're going to have a lot of conversations, and some of those will be disagreements. We might disagree on how much money should go to one church ministry or another. There might be disagreements on church staffing. There might be disagreements on styles of music and worship. There are probably going to be some disagreements at times on political issues. My hope and prayer for us is that we will have at the well conversations that invite vulnerability and trust, deep listening, and loving respect for one another, even when we disagree, because it's in that kind of conversation that we know Christ's presence with us. And we're changed, just like the woman at the well. Jesus and the woman at the well came because they were both thirsty. And though it was against convention for men to speak to women and for Judeans and Samaritans to interact, Jesus initiated conversation. And that conversation deeply went into theological conversation. Then and now, when we don't have real conversation, we risk detachment and distance. And I would say that in our time of siloed news and siloed social medias, we are thirsty for real conversation and for the understanding and connection that happens when we really listen. Did you notice in that passage that the woman was asking a lot of questions? Not questions that already had right answers, not simply polite civil questions. She's curious. There is a longing for information and understanding. She is full of thoughtful questions, and Jesus invites and affirms those questions. And the questions lead her to seeing who Jesus really is. What we see at the well is a genuine interest in one another. There may be confusion, there may be misunderstanding, but they hang in there. They listen until they reach the point where she is so inspired, she leaves behind her water jar and runs to the town to tell others about this one in whom she knows there is new life. When we read John's gospel, when we read that word believing, it is synonymous with relationship. The revelation in Jesus' conversation with the woman at the well shows us true relationship, mutuality, regard, reciprocity. This unnamed woman at the well is the first one to whom Jesus reveals his true identity. I am. not to the Jewish leaders, not to the disciples, but to her, a woman, a social and religious outsider. In Jesus, the woman experiences being truly seen and heard, and she becomes the bearer of the good news of love. In another congregation, I knew a person who frequently found himself on the opposite side of most political and theological issues. It wasn't easy to talk to him. I sometimes, when I saw him coming, I wanted to dodge him and his questions. And I didn't want to offend him. But worse, I saw that other people in the congregation reacted in the same way. It was tempting to dodge him. But here's the thing. He kept choosing to be part of the congregation. He kept choosing to be part of the church. And we kept having long conversations about the sermons, about politics, about life. Years into him being part of the church life, his wife underwent a very serious health condition, and they were no longer able to live together. People in the congregation went out of their way to visit, to send cards, to pray for them, to show support. And then he had more time on his hands. And every time we had a fellowship event, and when we needed a dishwasher, he was the master dishwasher. Much appreciated, much loved. Somehow, despite those deep differences, we were seeing and hearing each other for real. Which person might you meet at the well? Who in your life needs hearing into speech? How would your life and life here at St. Andrew be changed in the hearing? What if we saw Jesus in our next challenging conversation? What would the world be like then?